With Dane Waters, and I'm your host, Dane Waters. Thought I would try a different voice just so people would wake up and realize it's Dane Waters. I thought about Darth Vader, Luke, you are my father, but since it was Father's Day the other day, but okay, I guess I got to get serious now because we got a lot of serious subjects to talk about. So, what's happening? Well, the Iran war, the Iran-Israeli conflict. We'll talk about that here briefly shortly after the break. It's escalating. I think that one of the things we'll talk about in the next break, exactly what is the rationale behind the conflict, where is it going, what's going on. We have to understand that Israel, is still occupying parts of Lebanon, Lebanon, they haven't left. There's potential for conflict in Syria. So whatever happens in Iran, between Iran and Israel, I don't believe that this is the last what we're seeing in the region, but we'll talk about that here after the break. Trump, the G7 is meeting. So what's going on there? The big focus there is about trade and trying to ensure that the world is basically the precious minerals are protected. Because when we get down to it, trade is trade is trade. It doesn't matter. But if we don't protect the important minerals that we use to make phones, that we use to make all of our technology, excuse me, then we're all in a very difficult shape. So the big focus of the G7 right now is on trade, but primarily on how to protect the world's minerals from the bad guys, because even the G7 recognizes that the world is being divided into good versus evil. And then after our first guest, our second guest is going to be Senator Ben Murray Bruce, and who's going to talk some common sense to us about what's going on with the G7 and things of that nature around the world. So just a lot going on. Anyway, let's take a quick break. Let's get back to our guest and get started. Thanks for joining Around the World with Dane Waters. Thank
What we've always maintained is that the Nevertron movement. I'll break it down into a couple of different area. Lagos has become one of the largest exporters of illegal ivory in the world.
Of the third world nation, where your votes will get stolen if you can vote there at all.
Lagos has become one of the largest exporters of illegal ivory in the world.
Of the third world nation, where your votes will get stolen if you can vote there at all.
Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. No silly voices now because we have very serious stuff to talk about. During the break, I was talking to my guest Theo Zenou. Oh, I should know Theo Zenou. Is that right? Zenou?
I think
Zenou?
Zenou it works. Zenou gives it a bit more of a flair, so I'll leave it up to you. It's your show.
Oh, Theo Zenou. Okay, give us some more flair because this show needs more flair, so we'll do that. But we were talking about, the world, and before we get into our topic, we were talking about how the world could be a better place. And one thing, I really do believe that if Americans actually traveled more and got out and explored real countries, whether it's Nigeria or whether it's Russia or Ukraine or countries in the Middle East, I think the world would be a better place because Americans would understand the reality and not just going to Paris or London and things of that nature. But we'll come back to that. Anyway, Theo, thanks for being with us today.
Anytime.
So we're talking about political violence, but before and the growth of political violence around the world. But before we get to that, I want to just have a quick conversation about what's going on between Iran and Israel. What's your take on that?
Well, you mentioned Star Wars earlier. It seems like it's real life Star Wars, basically. So, for years and years, the Iranian government has threatened that they would acquire nuclear weapons. They've started a nuclear program of enriched uranium. According to intelligence estimate, before this Israeli attack, they were a few months, maybe a few weeks from being able to acquire a nuclear weapon. Now, that's always been a red line for Israel. The Iranian regime has threatened to attack Israel should they get a nuclear weapon. So the Israeli government ordered preemptive strikes across Iran on Iranian nuclear facilities, as well as on Iranian infrastructure, oil fields, government buildings, military sites, and so on. I think it appears obvious now that Israel is not just in it to weaken Iran through surgical strike and then leave. They're all trying to potentially overthrow the government of Iran.
Well, I think that yeah, I think that the whole regime change. I think you're right. I mean, listen, the world, even the G20 or 20 major countries in the Middle East came out with a statement talking about the need to have a nuclear-free Middle East. So I think there's a global consensus that Iran doesn't need nuclear weapons. Um, but then the question becomes, okay, you go in there and take out your nuclear facilities, but the assassinations they're making, they're basically killing all of their top generals, basically following the Hezbollah model where they kill everybody. And there's been rumors and talk that they wanted to assassinate the Ayatollah, which America said no to, which I still think is probably a possibility that they're going to do. But that's the thing. I mean, it's one thing to destroy, and by the way, I'm not taking sides, I mean, to be very clear about that, but it's one thing to go in there and destroy the nuclear capabilities. But what do you think about regime change? Do you think that it's necessary that there be regime change in Iran to cease their nuclear program and their nuclear desires?
That certainly is a position of the Israeli government. The belief is, in fact, if they were to stop now and the Iranian government survives, then any sensible Iranian government would rush to acquire a nuclear weapon to establish deterrence so these attacks cannot happen again. So it's now in a catch-22. If you don't go all the way, then potentially you leave Iran weaker in the present, but stronger in the future when it does eventually acquire nuclear weapons. But there is a complication here, which is that it's actually not a given that Israel is able to fully wipe out Iranian nuclear program, since much of it is deep, 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 deep underground, under mountains. And the bombs that Israel has are simply not able to penetrate the soil so deep. American military has bombs that can do that. So now another key question is it simply an Iran-Israel war, or is it an Iran-Israel-US war? And Israel would certainly hope that the US would join in through targeted strikes of these Iranian nuclear facilities.
Well, I do believe that there's a very strong chance, especially since President Trump left the G7 early, that they're giving serious consideration to engaging in the conflict. You're right. America has what they call the bunker busters, which are the weapons that can actually go deep. And it's going to be critical to actually destroy the Iran's nuclear capabilities to do that. And I agree with you. I mean, I think that you can't just stop for now. You have to continue and see it all the way through. So I think this war is going to escalate. Just like I think you're going to see the war between Ukraine and Russia escalate. I think you're going to see other conflicts escalating. I'm heading back to Asia to talk about the issues there, where there's a possibility of escalation war there. But let's take all of that escalation, government to government escalation, and let's go to political violence. Because, listen, we live in a world of violence these days at all levels. It's not just governments to governments bombing each other. We wanted to talk specifically about political violence. So help us understand your view on political violence and what's happening, and what's your definition of political violence?
Political violence is a very straightforward phenomenon. It's when people or groups kill for political purposes or threaten to kill for political purposes. You could target an elected representative from the opposing party because they don't share your views. You could target a representative from your side to pressure them to vote in the way that you want them to vote. You could also abduct politicians. You, in certain cases, can kill them. This is, as you said, a very old phenomenon in a sense, right? It's tribalism at the level of political factions, and it's a zero-sum game. And usually in democracies, you don't have political violence because people are able to express themselves at the ballot box, and the disagreements take place in parliament, in the media, in public debates, but don't turn to, all right, let me take a baseball bat and threaten you then because I don't like what you're saying about cutting taxes. However,
Well,
across Western democracies in recent years, we've seen a huge rise of political violence, and that's not just in the US, but also all across Europe.
but the political violence isn't just politician to politician. It's not just like, like we've seen in Colombia, which we'll talk about, where the assassination of political candidates, or where we see in Mexico the killing of mayors, where we see, we can talk about, what's happening in Iran and Israel with the assassination of, leaders. But it's also political violence. It's violence motivated by political beliefs,
Yes.
right? So in the United States, we've had two very recent examples. One just the other day, 2 or 3 days ago, where one of the leaders of the Wisconsin. Well, walk us through what happened. I should know that I'm American, but it was in Wisconsin. Wasn't it Wisconsin where they I think it was
Minnesota.
Wisconsin. Minnesota. All those countries, Midwest. Wisconsin, Minnesota. It's part of the world I don't really go to.
So in Minnesota, you've had two state senators who are Democrats who've been targeted by a Trump supporter, right? He's not in any way affiliated with the Republican Party. He's not taking orders from anyone. It looks like he's a lone wolf, but he's deep, deep, deep in supporting MAGA. He posed as a cop and went to the house of these politicians. So they opened the door and he killed one state senator as well as a partner, and then he injured another one. So this is clear-cut political violence. It's essentially assassination, right? And across American history, we've had big cases of political assassination. Abraham Lincoln, the president, was killed after the Civil War. William McKinley, the president, was killed at the height of the Gilded Age. John F. Kennedy was killed, obviously, in 1963. And well, now, Martin Luther King was also killed during that decade in 1968. That was Kennedy's brother in 1968 too. So we're now entering another era of political violence where attacks against politicians are becoming normalized, but also attacks between people, supporters from different political factions are becoming normalized, as well as threats, intimidation, whether in the real world or online.
Well, this is the thing you see in most what I call underdeveloped countries or third world countries. You see this type of violence where you see this polarization. When there's extreme political polarization, they take the violence out and they kill, people of different parties. But it's not just political parties, because in the United States we also have the assassination or murder of the head of the United Healthcare. So talk to us about that, and how you attribute that to political violence.
Yes, so that case happened last December. I don't know if people in Nigeria heard about it. It was huge in America and across most of the Western world. In fact, the CEO of America's most profitable health insurance company was gunned down one morning in Manhattan. The alleged killer was arrested 5 days later. His name is Luigi Mangione, 26-year-old college graduate, doesn't have a history of violence. With him, he had a manifesto in which he essentially says, the healthcare system in America is broken. Many people die because of the healthcare system in America, and I'm taking revenge on behalf of the people, is essentially his argument. But what's very interesting is that he's been exalted on social media. People have shared his mugshots. He's a very handsome guy, so that certainly helped. But it's more than that, is that he what became a lightning rod for popular rage and popular anger towards the healthcare system in America, and more broadly, I would say, towards the corporate domination of the American economy. And although it's been 6 months, he's still being talked about. They've made documentaries about him, they're making a musical about him. His trials are due to be next year or the year after. So this is going to be a long-running story, and it crystallizes another key aspect of political violence, which is that in a democracies where corporations wield huge power, then they also become targets. It's not simply political power, it's also economic power. And right now in America, there are a lot of grievances against, if you will say, the modern day robber barons, the big tech CEOs, the healthcare CEOs, and someone like Luigi Mangione was able to get to one, deliver a message. And what we see from social media and from opinion polls is that Americans might not necessarily condone the murder, but they also don't want to condemn Mangione for his action.
Well, no, it's like my son. I mean, he definitely doesn't condone the murder, but
No.
but he says he understood in his mind because healthcare systems and healthcare providers in the United States have a very bad reputation, and they do every single day make decisions about who lives and who dies based upon whether they allow treatment or not. So there is that following. Many people equate him, Mangione, to like the modern day Robin Hood, trying to t defend the poor and those less privileged against these big corporations. But I would argue that what we're seeing in America, and actually even in like the UK, because there's political violence. There's been political violence in the UK over the last year as well, and so in these democracies where and I think in the UK it's pretty much over immigration issues, right? Where we saw the violence in the streets and things of this nature. But it's all about political polarization. And I think the entire world, even your home country,
Oh, yeah.
France. I mean, you see it there, between the far right and Macron's party. I mean, the polarization is getting to the point where people believe, in my opinion, that elections are not the cure. Taking the violence into their own hands is a cure. I mean, how do we address this? What do we do to fix it?
So that's an extremely important point, which is that the normal ways that democracies fix themselves have not completely lost public trust. So I'll just give you one figure. There are 150 million Americans who think that elections won't fundamentally change America. So even if people vote in elections, they don't necessarily believe it's going to make any kind of meaningful difference. And the issue is that when people don't think elections can make a difference, they don't just stay home and watch Netflix or go on social media. They usually take action of some sort. And the only other result you have, if it's not through peaceful democratic means, is through violence, whether it's organized violence, and you are going to see, I believe, in the coming decade, the rise of armed political factions and more terrorist groups like there was in the 1970s in America, say the Weather Underground or the Red Brigades in Italy, or lone wolves like allegedly Luigi Mangione or allegedly the killer in Minnesota. So how do
You
democracies
know,
fix that? First, I think they have to reckon with the fact that public trust is at an all-time low, and they have to try bold reforms to re-engage people democratically.
yeah, but what is a bold reform? I mean, what can
Well,
we do in America?
if you look at when political violence spikes across American history, it always spikes in times of great economic strife, great economic inequality. So you had an upsurge of political violence during the Gilded Age and in the very early 20th century. This is when William McKinley was killed. This is where robber barons were targeted by anarchists. This is where when anarchists bombed New York several times. You also have political violence during the Great Depression, the rise of bank robbers like John Dillinger, which were exalted in their day, targeting cops, killing bankers, robbing banks. And you also have a rise of political violence during the civil rights movement, which was a time of great polarization. So, quite frankly, the only democratic remedy we know for violence is to make life better for most people in society so that A, don't feel attracted to violence, or B, don't condone it, which is going to be the case for most people. So that means you need to find a way in America to actually fix the healthcare system and make a country that's a bit more prosperous. Most Americans, this is a shocking statistic, most Americans don't have more than $500 on their bank account in savings, which means that at any given time, if say they lose their job or they get hit by a bus, they're wiped out. They will become homeless. This perpetual stress, this perpetual sort of Damocles sword hanging over most people's head makes life very stressful psychologically for a lot of people and then makes them either more likely to snap or more likely to support acts of political violence.
Yeah, well, sadly, we're out of time, but I agree with you. I mean, but if you look at America, for example, which we are, even though we don't have savings, as you talk about, I mean, it is one of the most profitable countries in the world. And, you couple that polarization with the ability to access and get weapons like guns, I mean, it really makes it a very difficult place to be. But no, I'm really concerned about the growth of political polarization. America, I think, can withstand it for the most part, but other countries that can't withstand it, you're going to see regime changes. You're going to see the bad guys winning out, and I do think that you'll see countries like Russia and China and North Korea promoting some of this political violence in places to destabilize the region. So it's something that we just can't overlook. Anyway, Theo, it's great seeing you again as always. It's never long enough, but I will have you back on the show again, and I hope you have a great day. So
Thank you so
let's take
much.
a quick break from Around the World with Dane Waters, and we'll be back with our next guest.